We'll be covering how we migrated over 1,000 applications from our legacy monitoring tools onto Datadog in under a year. Our goal is to share our story so that you can use it as an example for your implementation. How many people do I need? How long will this take? What are the pitfalls? My name is Erin Rakickas. I'm a senior technology architect and have been with Accenture for over 20 years. I was the technical manager for our Datadog implementation.
My name's Leah Einterz, and I was the program manager who was responsible for the implementation of Datadog at Accenture.
All right. I'll start with our obligatory All About Us slide. Marcom gave this to me 2 months ago, and I think it's already out of date. I understand we're now up to 744,000 employees, over $60 billion in revenue. Just a few numbers about our Datadog implementation. I know as you guys come to these talks, everybody likes to talk about how big their Datadog implementation is. You're going to hear about the number of servers that we monitor and things like that. Our scale isn't necessarily about the number of servers, it's about the number of applications. So we had over 1,100 separate applications that are monitored with Datadog, 230,000 objects. We have 1,700 unique users logging into Datadog every month, and we've had that for the last 6 months. We collect 5.5 million metrics every minute. All right, little about me here. I started as a performance engineer, about 15 years ago. And I entered the role of a performance engineer about 15 years ago. And today we would call that an SRE. My role at the time was I would run SWAT calls. And so applications that were having performance issues or stability problems, they would give me and my team a call and we would step in and say, hey, what can we do to help you? And 15 years ago, if you guys have been around a while, you know what that was like. It was, hey, let's run memory dumps. Let's try and figure out where the problem is. Let's do SQL traces. Troubleshooting was a real pain. So we started to look at application performance management solutions that were out there. We've tried a few different ones. We found one we really liked and we deployed about 10 years ago, and it drastically changed our experience. We went from troubleshooting in 6 hours down to about 30 minutes. In fact, most of our troubleshooting calls were more about convincing everybody and making sure we got the right solution implemented rather than actually trying to figure out what the problem was. This is great, but the problem with all of this is that our company's been on a cloud journey for a while, much like many of you guys. 12 years ago, we were migrating our VMs to the cloud. 8 years ago, we said no more VMs. We're now building cloud native applications. And our APM monitoring solution, I saw the usage decline as we really couldn't use it for functions as a service, platforms as a service. Worked great on VMs, worked great for monitoring IIS and ASP.NET, didn't work so well on Lambda. And that was the thing that kept me up at night. How in the world am I going to troubleshoot when I have a Lambda function calling a Lambda function and I don't know what's going on? The teams that were implementing this, it was up to them to do their own monitoring. And I had about 20% that really knew what they were doing and they would put some really good monitoring in place. And if there was a problem, they knew exactly where it was. The rest of them didn't, and we were back to spending 6 hours troubleshooting. So back in early 2020, we decided, let's see if we can start to centralize some stuff. So we started to look at building our own solution using Lambda logs and competitor Datadog to see if we could figure out how do we start to centralize this and give us some better visibility into what's happening. That went okay, but it worked for Lambda. It didn't work for the rest of the cloud native functions or the other cloud services that we had. So we started a journey to look at what the cloud providers were and what was going on there. All right. And so what were we really looking for? First thing is we wanted to consolidate. We had 4 different monitoring tools that we were predominantly using: infrastructure monitoring, application monitoring, end user monitoring, and synthetic monitoring. We wanted to see if we could bring that into one. Second thing is we were still mostly focused on infrastructure monitoring. Application monitoring was limited to our top applications that happened to be running on IIS. How do we shift everything and shift that mindset from, oh my goodness, my CPU is high, towards what is my end user actually experiencing and are they noticing a problem? Our performance, we had a lot of gaps in our knowledge, of course. I mentioned that we really didn't have cloud native solutions and we were trying to fill that gap in. The last thing was not all of our systems reported metrics in the same way. Our application monitoring gave me resolution down to the 1 minute mark, but our infrastructure was the 10-minute mark, and my end user monitoring system, I got number of users by day. Didn't really help me in a lot of troubleshooting. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leah, and Leah's going to talk about our Datadog decision and what we did to go ahead and implement that.
This slide makes it look like we all had it figured out. And if you're looking to do something similar to this, I highly suggest modeling it as this slide suggests. And although we did eventually get to this vision, we definitely didn't start here. And as you'll see in the coming slides, we had a very specific scope, a small team, and we quickly jumped into what I fondly refer to as the season of chaos. But let's take a big step back about 18 months and talk about where we started. So to set the stage, the team had their problem statement and their marching orders. Take about a month to do paper evaluations of 4 vendors for cloud native monitoring. Seems simple enough. In the first month, they planned to bring in a knowledgeable technical lead. That's this guy, if you guys haven't picked that up yet. They planned to bring in an experienced delivery team. Our tech lead's sitting over there. George, say hey. Yeah. And then they plan to bring in a seasoned program manager with a track record of success in delivering this type of project. And if you're thinking that's me, you're wrong. That guy went MIA in week 2. And it was an abrupt exit, like really abrupt. The project sponsor was left with no choice but to bring in a non-technical project manager who thought that Datadog meant they got to play with puppies all day long, and who it took entirely too long to realize that rum didn't mean they got to reenact Pirates of the Caribbean at team events. Didn't stop me though. And so yeah, that's me. If we want to go forward one slide. I am the new program manager up there in the box, and I was a little bit more excited that Bytes, the Datadog logo, has a name than the fact that our development team automated onboarding for over 1,000 applications. And I know that Erin was really excited to lose that seasoned program manager right out of the gate. But I digress. As of the end of October, that's when we started, the project plan was proceeding without much issue. And in fact, it was going so well that we were already looking at expanding our scope. But at the start of month 2, we actually lost our boss, not the program manager, now the guy that we both report to. He went on parental leave. So we got a new guy. And although getting him up to speed didn't take away from the development the development work, it did take us a little bit of time to get him up to speed. And now we had a new leadership view on the value realization of the tool. So we're looking at our 3rd scope change in about a month and a half. And just about the time we got him fully up to speed, the paper evaluations had concluded. And at that point, we were leveraging our managing director, Don, who thankfully did not go on leave. And he wasn't exactly new, but we were leveraging him to convince our executive leadership team, including the company's CIO, to invest in a full-scale proof of value with one of the vendors. And this is where Datadog comes in case you guys were curious. If we want to go forward one. Oh, I'd like to note, as all good project planning goes, that meeting wrapped up at about 3 p.m. the Friday before Christmas of 2020. Really good at planning these things. Okay, so if we fast forward to the first week of January 21, we had tentative approval, but not a lot of runway. You see, leadership had given us until about early February to convince them to invest in a massive multi-year partnership. So we shifted our project team again and worked closely with Datadog to align to the new scope. Our account manager, Kevin, became #1 on Erin's speed dial and probably deserves a massive raise at this point. By this time, we slid into month 5. We had accommodated the rapid timelines given to us by our leadership team. So when Don pulled us into a call to provide an update from his leadership sync, I was fairly certain he had an office pool going with the other managing directors over which one of us was going to cry first. You see, he's a no-nonsense kind of guy, and that call went something like this. The first thing Don said was, "Congratulations, you convinced them." But then there was this brief, awkward pause. You know, the kind where your boss stops talking and you're not sure if you're supposed to talk, but then it's just really weird and you're remote, so you're like, Anyway, that was this call. Eventually, Don did nonchalantly follow up with, Oh, by the way, our legacy contracts are due for renewal at the end of the year, so you have until then to convince them. And it was at this point that I'm pretty sure I lost the office pool. However, we were remote, and the mute button is a beautiful thing, so there's absolutely no proof. Moving on, at that point, we all wanted to take PTO, but we were about to jump into a massive period of chaos. And I think it's important to note what all project managers know. Critical resources are always readily available. Nobody ever leaves unexpectedly. Heart attacks and parental leave aren't a thing. People don't change companies, and COVID, it was a conspiracy theory. However, if you find yourself with a project that experiences things similarly to us, like we did in phase 1, all you can do is reset expectations and keep moving. Cross-trained teams and an agile approach get you most of the way there, but you'll want a project plan that has resource resiliency baked in wherever feasible. Also, documentation is often an underrated and overlooked secret weapon. By this point in the project, I think I'd been updating the scope document and resource documentation regularly and providing weekly updates about the change impacts to leadership. And so nobody likes surprises. We worked to make sure that our leadership team knew exactly what was coming and what their decisions meant every single time. But just because nobody likes them doesn't mean they don't happen. And you can't really expect surprises, but you can plan around them, and you can ensure that you have a process in place so that when they pop up, you can address them quickly. Phase 2 saw some developmental surprises for us, which we needed to shift. Erin's going to touch on some of the keys to success here in a little bit on how we worked with those. But by this point in our project timeline, we had experienced what felt like constant change. So we quickly recovered from the the shock of the huge scope ask with the itty-bitty time frame. And we jumped into month 6 from the start of the project, March for us. We had a steady program manager, 2 project managers, 1 focused on engineering and 1 to plan out onboarding. As you've heard now, we had over 1,000 applications that were not centrally managed. And although we could automate some stuff, the struggle was real and getting bigger every single week. Phase 2 saw a lot of trial and error from a development approach, and I'm pretty sure our team doesn't remember if there was an April that year or not. As we hit month 8, May, we knew we needed to shift our approach once again. So we brought in a fully allocated and beefed up development team, a customer enablement team, and a strong administrative team pushing the project forward. And that's when we rolled on our first 5 applications. And the feel was, wow, 5 applications, only 995 left to go in 6 months. Okay. All joking aside though, those 5 were instrumental in helping define what our Datadog offering was going to be and how we were going to get all of this done with just 6 months left. So every month from June to August, the team enabled more application teams with more functionality until we had developed enough to open up mass onboarding. There was a lot more excitement about Datadog coming into Accenture than we had originally anticipated, and it lent itself to some very intense moments for our PMO team. Honestly, I don't really remember much of phase 3 leading up to September. I know there was a lot of development, a lot of communication, and a lot of rum of both varieties. So as we jump into September, the team saw a fully allocated program manager, a dedicated PMO manager, 5 formal work streams, each with fully dedicated project managers and PMO resources, technical leads for every work stream, and large development and technical teams supporting the project objectives. Nobody went on leave. We had people working in every major time zone across every shift, in multiple languages, all marching towards December. And I don't know what this slide is saying. Everybody I know really enjoys the stress and overtime that holiday deadlines bring. But even with that, we're not a fan of arbitrary deadlines. And given my lack of experience with this type of project and the changing leadership early on, every time we came near to something big like a holiday, a fiscal year change freeze, or a hot PTO timeframe, we tried to determine the best alternative deadlines that gave the project team enough time to enjoy time away and refresh. Sometimes that meant we got to pull our deadlines a little earlier, And sometimes that meant we didn't have any good alternatives. However, we moved entirely too fast on this project not to prioritize the mental health and well-being of our people. A quick example. In order to avoid termination late fees for our 4 legacy vendors, we had to have all of the applications onboarded by the end of December. So on my original project timeline, I put in all caps, drop dead date, December. However, in early May, we met with the technical leads and determined that we could actually have most of the development work, the automated stuff, all ready by the end of November. And that would actually give our folks who needed to chase down application teams more time to get ready. This allowed for our leadership team to get involved in enough time to chase down the last few applications before the December chaos came. I should also mention, if this project wasn't crazy enough, in October we had a huge amount of database monitoring scope creep. In November we saw budget cuts, and then in December, right as we were all getting ready to take PTO for the first time in 18 months, this little thing called Log4j hit. But we did it. We rolled out 8 robust monitoring service areas to over 1,000 applications, unique and distributed applications at that, terminated 4 legacy contracts on time and retired a large legacy infrastructure, all to expectations of our stakeholders. The project that started as a simple paper evaluation for cloud native monitoring in the middle of a global pandemic ended with the delivery of end-to-end monitoring for the entire application landscape just over a year later. And we all did get to take PTO eventually. So for all of those of you who haven't been listening, here's your TLDR. If you're going to do this, you'll start with one thing. Whatever it is, make sure it's clearly documented and clearly communicated to the right people, because it's going to change. And that change is going to impact delivery somehow. And then once it does, you're going to communicate that. And you're going to do it again and again, and it's still going to change. Now, don't get me wrong. Eventually, you'll figure it out, and it will stop changing. But by that time, you'll probably be retired. So for those of you who want a more detailed blueprint, Erin has some really great insight into the more technical aspects of how we managed to pull this off.
Thank you, Leah. All right, so what were those keys to success that allowed us to successfully deploy this? And I will say this is what we went in, we knew this going in, and these were some of those golden rules that we had for us to say, hey, what do we need to make sure we're gonna follow? So what are those principles? First thing is leadership buy-in. Our directors understood the value of having centralized monitoring for all applications. I mentioned that I'd run the performance engineering team, our precursor to SRE, for a while. They knew what good monitoring got us. They were familiar with the idea that, hey, I go from 6 hours of troubleshooting down to 30 minutes of troubleshooting. They saw the value. When we said, hey, we want to do one centralized system and we want to fill in all those gaps around our cloud monitoring, they jumped at the opportunity. And that allowed us to have the top-down support that we needed to make sure that we got everything done. As a result, all of those application teams that had to do this work, as we went to them, what's their natural response? Oh, I'll go to my boss and they'll get an exception for me. Nope, didn't happen. No exceptions from any MDs, any of our managing directors for any of the work that we were doing. Next thing on here is minimizing the work. I'm going to 1,100 different applications and I have to say, hey, I want to get you onboarded to Datadog. Here's what you need to do. I'm going to get about 20% that are going to say, yay, I get to do some extra work. And the rest of them are going to drag their feet. We've all been there, right? Nobody else wants to do any more work. They don't have capacity. They don't have the time. You want to do more work, you got to give them a budget and say, okay, we'll pay for it. So we went through and we automated as much as we possibly could. We wanted to get to the point that it was 0 effort onboarding for the application teams. I will say this, if it came down to, I can onboard this application and all you have to do is push a button, we pushed the button for them. We still didn't trust them to do the work. So we automated as much as we could. And in fact, most of the stuff was entirely automated. Infrastructure monitoring, cloud monitoring, container monitoring was 100% automated. The applications did not need to do a thing to get onboarded. The only thing we asked them to do was verify that they could see their data in Datadog. Next area is white glove service. So I was talking before about my history with application performance monitoring. We've had a long time that we've been doing this. And about 5 years ago, we looked at our previous tool and we said, well, how many people are actually using this? Of all the applications we onboarded, we found that about 20% were looking at their data on a daily basis, and another 10% were looking at it on a weekly basis. So we launched a program where we sat down with every single application team one-on-one, and we said, let's look at your application in our performance monitoring tool, and let me show you exactly what I can see when I use this tool. And you see the little light bulbs go off in the head. Oh my goodness, I didn't realize this was happening. I didn't realize this was available. And after that, we saw 80% adoption of our tools. We continued that into Datadog. And I'll tell you another story. I don't know how many times I've seen an application that's about to go live and they tell me this is the best application ever. Everybody in the firm is going to spend their entire day in this application. I'm going to have 100,000 users logging in every hour. They tell me these kinds of stories and they can't figure out why nobody's in there. By having this white glove service and by introducing the teams one-on-one with this, they saw the value of Datadog. They saw the value of what we were trying to do, and they were eager to do that for themselves. The team didn't stop there. That same team also put together a training program, and we ran a number of mass training classes to really introduce people to the platform and make sure they knew how to use it. This was not a one-time training. We were running training sessions. Our normal training sessions was 4 times a month for 6 months. Now, you only had to attend one of those training sessions. You didn't have to attend all of them. But we also did more in-depth training. So for those architects and the engineers that were really into the platform, we ran a 4-week-long program. It was 1 hour per week, and you come in, over the 4 sessions, and you really start to learn the details of Datadog. And you start to learn exactly what you can do with it. Last 2 areas, we've had a program within our global IT organization that we call our collateral program. And the collateral program was something we leveraged. The collateral program itself looks at any time we have a large infrastructure or security issue that is going to impact a large number of applications, we want to make sure that everybody's doing this. So we have programs to make sure that that gets in front of everybody. These are the top 5 priorities that we have for the global IT organization. These are the due dates you have to get stuff done. It all gets tracked as tickets within ServiceNow. You have to answer a survey by this date. You have to get something done by a certain date. You've got to make sure you're checking this off. If you're not done on those dates, it shows up on the leadership reports. It goes to your director. These directors have fun with this. They always want to be the first one to get to 100%, and it becomes a right of bragging between them. So they really push their teams. And once the teams start showing up yellow and red on this, I've got managing directors that are then pinging the teams for me. But that leads me to my last point. As Leah said, the goal we had put in place was to have this done by November 30th with the goal that we knew we had a month of leeway in there. So once we hit November 11th or so, about the second week in November, we had an administrative team, Leah's team, that was reaching out to every application team that wasn't done yet, that wasn't green. Hey, when are you going to get done? When is this going to be, you've got to take care of this. By the way, this is going away. By and large, as soon as you start reaching out to folks, they get tired of having you ping them every day. So eventually they just get the work done because they're tired of telling you why it's not done. I think we only had about 6 applications, 10 applications, something like that, out of the 1,000 that were not completed on November 30th and were still dragging their feet. But by that point, we had given them all due dates, and we pretty much set the line in the sand. Listen, December 31st is it. You don't have any monitoring after that if you're not on the new platform. And the last thing I want to do is be the program manager over an application that goes down. And the answer is, why didn't you know about it? Well, because we didn't have monitoring, because we didn't fix things. All right. That concludes our presentation. With that, I'll open it up for questions.
Okay, I'm gonna have these mics in the aisles so that folks can ask some lovely questions. But first, maybe a round of applause for our lovely presenters. Thank you. put this one on the other side.
Hey, and thanks, Erin, for a great presentation.
Haritha.
I know Erin for a long time. I know he's a very good technical architect and performance engineer. Thanks. This is a great presentation, and was very happy to see that you made it such a big migration in such short term. Uh, my question is, can you talk about some of your challenges dealing with so many different type of applications, and what are the key top 3 challenges or whatever you
Oh.
came across this.
Thanks,
migration.
Haritha. Haritha and I think have worked together, 18 years ago, I think I recall. So thank you. Yeah, a few challenges that we had. One of the biggest ones we had was around our database performance management system. So we had to retire our database performance management, and we actually started with, okay, what's the minimum viable product that we're going to need, and what can Datadog do for us? So I don't know if folks are familiar with database performance management. It's basically like application performance management for databases. What are the queries that are being run? How long is each query taking? Why is it taking as long as it is? So that's the kind of stuff you're tracking. At the time, Datadog didn't really have this, but in fairness, we didn't have a whole lot of applications that were using that. So we kind of said, okay, what can we do? So we put in a few counters with Datadog. You know, the thing I love about Datadog is it's a platform that's very customizable. So we put in a few counters and we said, okay, we can at least know if a database has a problem, even if we don't know exactly where it is. And then my DBA team called. And the DBA team wanted to know, wait, you're getting rid of our database performance management? Well, you guys don't use it. Oh, yeah, we do. We had a few things like that. We didn't know people were using these tools like we thought they were. So we had a little back and forth. We picked up the phone, we called Datadog, and we said, all right, here's the problem we're facing. Funny thing about Datadog, this was, probably about June last year. Datadog's, well, funny you should mention that. We're launching a product in a few months. So we jumped on the pilot program with them. That was one of the biggest nightmares I think we had is trying to figure out what we were going to do about database performance management, as we had to get rid of the old tool, but we really didn't have a new solution yet. Datadog did come through for us. They had a minimum viable product by November. And I would say by April of this year, it is certainly up there and is a very good product if you guys are looking at it. And just one more, I'll call it real quick. Our real user monitoring system, I didn't think anybody really used this, but one of the teams that came back and said, no, we absolutely have to know the number of unique users every month. We said, okay, the problem is we've got to be GDPR compliant. I can't track username. Now, our old system had gotten around this because they had some tricks that they played to get the numbers. I couldn't make it work with Datadog. We had to go back and convince them, hey, you're not going to get this, but what I'm going to get you instead is number of sessions per month, and you're going to have to use that as a proxy for number of users. Okay.
I have 2 questions. The first is, I wanted to confirm, this is a self-service system now, or how do you onboard new teams? And then the second would be, there's a lot of development that happened besides training. And so what are the gaps that you had to develop for, what did you have to fill, what were the gaps that you had to fill with your engineering teams in order to onboard Datadog?
Sure. So it is a combination of fully automated and self-service. So if you are doing infrastructure, container monitoring, or cloud monitoring, that is fully automated. You get that as soon as you deploy because you're deploying into one of our environments. It's baked into our templates, and you're going to have it automatically. We're actually trying to do that with our application performance management as well. There is some self-service portion to it though. For example, our real user monitoring, you do have to drop the little snippet of code at the top of your page. Application performance management, you do have to go, and right now I think we have it down to you add a step to your build pipeline, which will insert it for you, insert all the appropriate code for you. You asked the stuff we had to develop, that was it. I will say by and large, we're a .NET shop, .NET and Node.js, so we really had to focus on just a couple of technologies. We have a handful of Java applications that we custom did one off. But the bulk of our development effort was figuring out how in the world do we automate this stuff, and how do we automate this to the point that the user can come in and just click one button to install it. George here just gave a presentation a little while ago to talk about how we've now baked our APM solution into our Terraform template. So anybody deploying a container today gets APM automatically, and it's just built in. So we've really tried to make it to the point that you have to have it.
Hi, I'm Tyler, software engineer from Indeed. I think you mentioned for collateral tracking, tracking the top 5 biggest projects that teams need to be aware of. One of the biggest pieces of feedback we've gotten at our company is there's just way too many things you infrastructure teams are asking us to do. It seems like every month we have a log for shell, we have to update our Python version, whatever it is. So how do you manage, I guess, that list of 5, and how do you get on that list? And is there any kind of, I guess, gatekeeping you do there?
That's a good question. I'm glad you answered. Thanks, Tyler. I'm actually a member of the board, or one of the boards that sits over that list. So we do sit down when a team comes in and say, hey, we have this and this is a program. First of all, it has to be an approved program that's gotten funding. So at least leadership is aware of this. This isn't stuff coming out of the woodwork like, oh, what do you mean you need everybody to do this? This is usually approved programs ahead of time. We'll sit down and we'll grade it. And we have a leadership team that grades this and says, okay, what's the real priority here? What are you really trying to do? We sit down and look at how do we minimize the impact to the application teams themselves. For example, if I need to send out a survey to a team that says, hey, tell me about your application, give me your URLs or something like that, or give me a list of all your users or your interfaces, we look and say, no, we have that information. We collect it over here. Go talk to those folks. You're not going to bother a bunch of people with this information. So there is that vetting process in place. Not everything makes it through. There's an awful lot of how do we minimize the impact to the application teams, to the common application teams. I don't know if I really answered your question, but I'll tell you that it is something that we do look at, and it is a judgment call that gets made by leadership. It is not an automatic situation that you get it in there.
Hello. Hello, my name is Jairo Guerrero. I'm with Maersk. You showed us 5 phases, I think, for the project. I wonder about the deadlines. You mentioned prepare for changes. How many times did your deadlines change?
I'm going to let you answer that one.
I knew you were going to do that. Well, technically, our deadlines never changed. We just kept expanding and taking on more scope. So whenever we got, as I explained, we had 1 month originally. That's what was approved and funded. Once we realized the value and the potential for the new stuff, we got more funding, more approval, another deadline. We had 4 phases. The first phase, for the sake of this presentation, phase 1A, phase 1B, we changed 5 different deadlines from October to December in the first part of this project. And that's when we had the 2 bosses roll out. So it was a lot. Once we got that final approval to roll this out, our 1 deadline was December. And from then, every incremental deadline up to that point, they were flexible as long as they didn't risk the end of December. But that December deadline was truly that drop dead date. Good question.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. My name's Amy. So my question is, how did you decide on Datadog? Did you have other options? What was the decision making like?
It was fun.
Thanks, Amy. Good question. We did. We considered 4 different vendors. And if you want to talk quietly afterwards, I will do that. But I need to be careful on who I name drop here. I will say we considered 4 different vendors. Our primary consideration is who we felt was really looking forward to being cloud, to monitoring cloud native applications, because that was the core gap that we had to fill. And that's where we went through and we evaluated a few different folks.
We had a really intense scorecard that Erin developed, and we went through many iterations, and we got a lot of scrutiny from leadership on our scorecard. So it was an intense process.
Hi, my name is Michael. I'm from Insider Intelligence. We're kind of running into a similar situation where a contract's coming up at the end of the year that's ending, but we're a much smaller company, and what I can kind of relate to is I like the way you like mentioned as white glove service as like really being important to making sure that this implementation gets done. I was wondering if you could speak to kind of almost scaling down some of those processes for like having white glove service when you aren't this gigantic company like Accenture. We're just a very resource constrained DevOps team right now, and we're looking for ways to kind of, minimize work specifically for providing white glove service, because I personally think that's going to be critical to getting everybody on board. Because right now, with our current provider, I don't think a lot of devs even know how to use our current providers. So
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I will tell you our white glove service team, I call it the care team. They were my idea a few years ago, and they're my baby. We have 5 people on the team. So it's not a huge team to begin with. Most of what they do, I will tell you what they typically do is we have a 4-week-long engagement process that we run our high priority applications through. And every week we're going to meet with you for 1 hour, and this is what we're going to cover, and this is our goal for every meeting. We may extend it. It might be, hey, we get through 4 and we need to do 5 or 6, and that's fine. And we might need to move one because you know what, the development team can't meet with us this week. Our goal is to actually get through 30 of our high priority applications every quarter. So we only do 120 apps a year. We have about 300 what I would call high priority. So I know I said 1,100 applications. Obviously, they're not all my top apps. I have about 300 high priority ones. We do about 120. I'd like to get to 180 a year with the goal that we do those every 2 years. As far as scaling it, you probably only need one person doing this. Depending on the size of your development team and how many applications you need to meet with, this might be one person doing this as a part-time job. You might just need 1 or 2. It is not a large team. It is really a group of very specialized teams. They do things like, I need to create a custom monitor. I want to create a custom dashboard. That's the kind of stuff they know, and that's what they excel at.
Hi, Pratap Jadhav. I'm actually recently joined Datadog not that long ago, so hearing your story was great. I mean, okay, you made a great decision. But my question, I have 2 parts. Like, one is around executive sponsorship. You talked about top-down support. What really helped you ensure that? Like, what resistance points might have you come across, and I guess how you overcame that? But the other thing is just as you're going through this deployment, what I guess what stood out from as far as support from Datadog that kind of helped you critically meet some of these deadlines and those amazing metrics you put up there.
Thanks, Pratap. I'll take the first part, and then I'll let you take the second part.
Okay.
Yeah. Leadership support. We've been around. Leah and I have been around a while, so we had certainly visibility into leadership. Leadership knew what we were capable of, so they understood what we were trying to do, and they knew the challenges we were facing. They knew that we were on this cloud journey, and they certainly saw the challenge of we've got blind spots in our monitoring. It didn't hurt at all in the last 2 years. We had a number of incidents where it was 6+ hours to find the root cause because we didn't have monitoring in place. I think more than anything, that's what got it to us. But Leah, I know you had quite insight to our direct MD, and he was, he listened to us, I guess is what I would say, is we had their ear and we had their respect. And when we said we need to do this, they said, okay. So they just want to know how long is it going to take and how much is it going to cost. I'll let you take the next part.
Yeah. As far as data goes, I did mention our account manager, Kevin, in a little bit of a sarcastic pitch earlier, but that was truly what allowed us to be successful. We had a phenomenal account team with the Datadog vendor, and when we needed something, if we didn't get the response we wanted, we just called Kevin up, and he would move heaven and earth for the most part to get the right people on the call. And it was truly not an inconvenience at all. And we were white glove served by Datadog. We developed a lot a lot with them through the course of this project, and it truly was a partnership. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, nice presentation. My name is Leah. I'm a software engineer from Flutter House. I have a question on the developer team. You mentioned there were four teams at the peak time. I'm curious about the size of the team and what the focus area each team does. Thank you.
Do you want to take this one or you want me to?
I can start. So when we first started out on this, obviously we started with one team. Every time that our scope changed, we reorganized our team. We started out with a pizza box team of developers, 3 to 5. We had total 5 FTE at the start of the project. By the time we ended, we had a total of 50 FTE working on this. Our developers, when we started out with the paper evaluations, we had 4 vendors we were evaluating. So that was our original 4 leads, if you will. They kind of got shuffled around as we moved from the evaluation to the proof of value, proof of concept phases. But then as we dove into development, Erin has a couple of really strong technical leads on his team that kind of stood out and organized. But we really kept it to 2 or 3, maybe 4 people on our like intimate development teams. And as a result, we had a lot of quick adjustments in a very intimate setting that allowed us to do what we did. But to answer your question, we had the development teams, pizza box teams, and they all kind of fed up through a hierarchy.
And I'll just add to that. So I'm thinking through of our development teams. We talked about 8 different services: infrastructure, cloud, container monitoring, APM, RUM, synthetic monitoring, log, and event. We had different dev teams focused on different things. I had one team focused on RUM and synthetics. I had another team focused on APM and database monitoring. I had another team focused on how are we going to do containers, another one on infrastructure. So we split them up like that, and each one had the how am I going to automate this one thing and get everybody onboarded for this one area. And the development teams were really focused on automation, and with the exception of my synthetic team actually did do white glove service. So one of the things they did is rather than have 1,100 applications have to learn how to do synthetic monitoring, they would sit down with each team one-on-one, and in about an hour, you get an expert that knows synthetic monitoring, and like less than an hour, they sit there, all right, we got your script done, you're all set, you know. So that was the one exception where they actually did the work. Everybody else was just focused on how do we automate this.
Well, I've got another 2 questions. First one, the Uber CTO shared like the infrastructure costs as like a percentage a few years back. Yours was like within like 8 to 15, somewhere in that range. I'm curious, as legacy systems that you replaced, well, if you know your infrastructure percentage of infrastructure costs for monitoring before and after you switch to Datadog.
That's a good question. So just for monitoring costs, did monitoring costs change with Datadog? Yes, it got more expensive. Our legacy systems were focused on infrastructure, real user monitoring, synthetic monitoring, stayed roughly flat. We added in cloud monitoring, and we added in, APM went from monitoring our top 100 applications to everything. So with that, yeah, the costs went up as we did this switch. I will say as we're switching away from infrastructure and moving over towards cloud native services, costs feel like they're going down, but on paper it looks like they shouldn't be. On paper it looks like they should be staying flat, but we do seem to be dropping a little bit.
Cool. And the second question is, so there are all these legacy observability systems that you replace, like database one. I assume most of the teams are pretty busy. Now that they don't have these legacy systems, they do have to onboard and like build in new dashboards within the Datadog framework. And you mentioned that one of your teams did work with them, but it seems like you add a bunch of like a month or at least a few weeks of effort for the teams to learn a new system. Right? You push back your timeline. That's always fun.
We did. Yeah, we did. And I mean, I will tell you, one of those keys for us was ruthless standardization, both before and after Datadog. Pre-Datadog, we had said, these are the monitors you're going to have. These are the standard monitors. We'll build something custom, but it's an addition to our standard stuff. When we moved to Datadog, we did the same thing. So, I hear stories about, oh my goodness, we have thousands of custom monitors. This is your opportunity to go back and say, what are the monitors I really need everybody to have? Things like I care about app response time, throughput, error metrics, things like that. Those are the core metrics I need to worry about. If the app team really cares about something, they'll come back and they'll build it again, but you wind up with just a lot of bloat on the system. So when we did the switch, we just got rid of it.
Hi, my name is Jane Fader from Indeed, and I have kind of two questions a bit related. So first question is, when you started this work, right, you said you had 4 engineers who were evaluating it, but none of them, I guess, were familiar with Datadog. Mm-hmm. So how did you make sure that these are the people that actually could, I mean, I don't know, did they learn themselves? Did you train them? Basically, how did that help? Because then they will go and you said to provide the white glove service and consult and help. That requires a lot of expertise, I think. And the second question is, from your original project planning, right? How was your original resource planning versus where you end up with? As you said, 50 plus people. So I'm just wondering, how did that evolve?
I'll take the first part, yeah. Part of the evaluation was how easy is the tool to use and how easy is it to learn. And so, yeah, we had to learn the tools and the folks had to learn it. The good thing about our folks that were running, we had 4 architects, each one took a different platform. They were looking at the others as well. And once we started to narrow it down, we started to bring in a few more folks. We found some other close friends that we said, hey, we want you to try these out and give us your thoughts, give us your unbiased opinion on what you like, what you don't like about them. So we gathered some support from our community. The last thing we wanted to do is we didn't really want to come down from this ivory tower of thou shalt use Datadog. That was not our purpose. We really wanted to build consensus. So we had, and fortunately, we actually had one of our key apps, one of our biggest apps and one of our most forward-thinking apps about how they do monitoring and how they do deployments. They had already been using Datadog, and we started to leverage a lot of what they had done and what they had learned. They were enthusiastic supporters, and Leah mentioned our first 5 supporters at the end of phase 2. And those were those keys. Those were those key supporters that really drove the rest of the company to say, listen, this is a good product. But I will tell you, the key for us was ease of use and make sure that we had buy-in, not just from us. We didn't make this in a vacuum. We really gathered support. And I think in the end, we probably had, I would say we had about 15 or 20 different architects throughout the firm that weighed in on a decision. And so we had gathered a lot of feedback, and it really helped make the decision a little bit easier to say, listen, this is why we're going with this product instead of some of the others.
And you were able to do it in a month, you said, for the first original evaluation.
The original evaluation, we started in November, and I don't think we completed it until the end of January. I will say we didn't have a decision until the end of January. The original proof of concept was about 4 to 6 weeks. I'm going to say 6 because we had Thanksgiving in there. But we did not, we did the initial evaluation. Then we actually had to come back and do a second evaluation to say, let's prove out our results because there were questions that came out from leadership. We want you to do a little bit more work. And we made the decision end of January, February?
Yeah.
Something like that, yeah.
It's all kind of
it's a blur at some point,
From October to the end of January was rough that year.
Yeah, I'll let you answer the second part.
Yeah, as far as our resource plan goes, I can remember when I suggested bringing in 5 dedicated project managers and 5 dedicated PMO resources. I got a ton of pushback initially, and people were like, that's a bloated project budget. You're wasting money. However, our technical people then got to focus on the technical work, and we had project managers and PMO resources that took all of the junk and all of the bloat out of their jobs. So the work's it's gonna have to get done. So we brought in all of those headcount for a very short period of time, and it allowed our teams to go heads down. So formally on our project plan, obviously 8 service areas, everybody specialized in different service areas. Formally on our project plan, we had 5 work streams. And we organized our, like I said formal because it's not how we necessarily worked day to day, but we organized around those work streams, and that allowed, as I mentioned, a project manager and a PMO resource to focus on those folks, which allowed them to escalate to both Erin and I directly. Hey, this is raised in this weekly status as a potential blocker. Well, if we're aware of it, we can either try and deal with it, and if not, we'll escalate. So the resourcing built around those needs. What does each specific work stream need to be successful? We brought people in, we brought people off. The onboarding and offboarding of people was a constant fluid process on the project. But yeah, it got very big, very fast, but it also shrank very quickly at the end. Part of this project was obviously getting our operational teams all up to speed and ready to go. So we were responsible for that, and that's part of that 50 headcount is getting them ready to go.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I think we are at time.
Thank you.
Another
Thank you.
round of applause. Thank you.